So it puts us in the right footpath. So let me start by sharing my presentation so we can start talking and discussing our session today. I hope you can all see the presentation.
Yes, Doctor.
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm privileged and pleased to be with you today. Just a little bit about myself. This is my 25th year at the United Nations. I have served in many capacities. I was the head of UNEP in the Arab States region, and I was the global practice manager of the Energy and Environment group in New York, and have been working on environmental sustainability for almost all of my 35 years of career. But recently, in 2017, apologies, I was assigned to take the lead on engaging with faith-based organizations and religions at the United Nations Environment Program. So we established the Faith for Earth initiative, which I will be talking about. I'm very pleased to be with you today, and greetings to all the participants. And I hope that our discussions today will inspire some of you to take action, whether individual or collective action for the environment and for our generation, but also certainly for future generations. This is part of our responsibility. So let me start by introducing the United Nations Environment Program, which I am privileged to work at. UNEP is the global UN organization with an authority at the global level to keep the environment under review and promotes the implementation of the environment component. As Sister Nurul Huda mentioned, there are the economic, social, and environmental component of sustainability. So the United Nations Environment Program is the responsible body for the implementation of the environmental dimension of the Sustainable Development Agenda. We're going to be celebrating our 50th birthday next year in June. Again, next year will be the anniversary of 50 years of Stockholm. Stockholm, the global 1972, where agenda has been put on the international arena. Now, as mentioned by Sister Nurul Huda, we are facing unprecedented environmental challenges, and we call them the triple planetary crises. And they are manifested by climate change, nature degradation, and pollution. And you have been witnessing and seeing all around the world the severe weather events that strike not only developing countries, but developed countries. So ecosystem degradation is a serious environmental issue. We are facing the threat and risk of the extinction of almost 1 million species. We have 7.8 million species. The human race is one species out of the 7.8 million, but we are causing the threat of the extinction of 1 million species. So one species is controlling all other species on Earth. We know by scientific evidence that more than 66% of our marine ecosystems are already damaged or degraded or modified. And more than 420 million hectares of forests have been converted to either agricultural land or industrial land, or even for housing purposes. Now, 20% of croplands show stress or declining productivity. So that means whatever land we have for agriculture, we have been degrading, and it is not giving us the productivity that is supposed to be giving us. Climate change, we have been seeing over the past 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, global warming that is increasing the temperature on the surface of Earth. And that is mainly due to the increase in carbon emissions, which result from the burning of fossil fuel. The past decade, the past 10 years have seen tremendous changes in the ecosystems. For example, last year, the iceberg has melted, and it was the first time in history that this is recorded. We have been seeing a lot of floods and forest fires, not in areas that we are used to see hurricanes and so on, but also in the heart of Europe and the US. Probably you've seen and heard in the news about the floods and forest fires in Europe, in Germany, and Turkey, in different parts of the world. And even within the same country, the north of the country would face flooding and heavy rains, and the south of the country would face high temperature and forest fires. So climate change is a serious issue. And the IPCC report, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 6th edition, said that we are facing a code red, which was reflected by the Secretary General of the UN. We are in a very critical time in history where we are, according to the emissions gap report that was launched only last week, that we are in the pathway to get to 2.7 degrees warming, as opposed to the Paris Declaration, which requested member states to reduce their emissions to keep Earth below 2 degrees and hopefully 1.5 degrees. But according to all of the submissions of the national determined contributions, we are not going to meet that target. And we are on the path to 2.7, which is going to have drastic changes to Earth and to the people living on Earth. And the third crisis that we face is pollution and waste. And it is known that we produce a waste that is 40% of our food. So 40% of the food, before even it goes to our tables, it goes to waste, either because the selectivity of the type of the product, or because of the wasteful consumption and practices of the people. You probably have heard that in 2030, we will have more plastic in the oceans than fish, which is going to kill the marine life and, of course, impact the life of the people who depend on the marine ecosystems. But at the same time, we face hunger in many parts of the world. In Africa, there's 900 million people who go to bed without food or hungry. So this is a really devastating crisis that we are facing. Pollution kills 5 million people on every year because of air pollution. And there are, of course, other types of pollution to the soil, pollution to the air, pollution to agricultural lands, and pollution, of course, to water, which is very scarce in a number of countries. In addition to all of these crises, we have in 2019, of course, you all are living through the crisis of COVID-19 and the pandemic. But have we asked ourselves, where did we get this pandemic, this virus from? It is known by scientific evidence that more than 70% of all known viruses come from zoonotic diseases, which is a result of the interaction between humans and animals. Of course, the unsustainable practices of interacting with animals, the wildlife, and so on. So we are infringing on the animal life, causing the creation of these zoonotic diseases. And of course, because we are all living through this crisis, we all know the socio-economic impacts of the virus. We have lived, all of us, through lockdowns. Worship places were closed, airports were closed, businesses were closed, and of course, all of that has had socio-environmental economic impacts. But what are the real underlying causes for all of this, for all these global environmental challenges? As I mentioned, our practices, what we call the Anthropocene, which is the era where humans are the major factors affecting life on Earth. In the past 200 years, we have grown in population substantially, exponentially. In the 1970s, we were 2 billion people living on Earth. Today, we are more than 7.6 billion people living on the surface of Earth. So with the increase of the number of people, of course, there will be increase for food, increase for built areas for living. So urbanization has become a great and major impact on the areas and lands of Earth that used to be forests, that used to be agricultural lands, and so on. And of course, urbanization produces pollution, whether it is water pollution, solid waste, or even emissions to the atmosphere. Urbanization comes with mobility requirements, production of food, extraction of mineral and natural resources. So this is a drastic impact that we are increasing. And of course, to sustain the living of the people, industrial revolution has led to industrialization of our activities based on mainly coal, gas, and of course, petrol. And this is the main source of pollution and climate change, as well as ecosystem degradation. Now, because of all of these issues, in addition to the issues of poverty, issues of hunger, issues of inequality, issues of education. The world leaders in 2015 have signed what we called the Global Agenda 2030 and the underlying Sustainable Development Goals that were mentioned by Sister Nurul Huda. The overarching principles for the Sustainable Development Goals are healthy people living on a healthy planet, enjoying prosperity, and living in peace. And to do this, we need partnerships. We all are contributors to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Each of these goals have targets that the world community, not only the UN, but those Sustainable Development Goals came about by a campaign, a global campaign, which was called The World We Want. So the people of the earth have designed or have came up with those priorities that we need to tackle: ending poverty, ending hunger, improving education, increasing the equality between genders, and so on and so forth. Of course, for the first time, the planet has been given a prominent importance by agreeing on what we call the environmental targets or environmental goals, 6 or 7 of them, relating to life underwater, life above land, water resources, energy, sustainable consumption and production, and so on and so forth. And each of these targets, we have 17 goals, there are 169 targets, and each of those targets have indicators that the international community agreed to measure in order to measure where we are in terms of the implementation of the SDGs. And there are 202 indicators that have been agreed upon. But assessing where we are today, I am afraid even before COVID, we were not on target to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And after COVID-19, we are even behind on many of those targets. Some targets still do not have an agreed methodology to measure them. Some targets are being missed because of the lack of global commitment and so on. So we are really in a very critical situation in terms of achieving all of these goals. Now, these unprecedented global challenges would require unprecedented responses. And as you all know, Albert Einstein said, you cannot solve the problems in the same way and thinking the way you created these problems. So we cannot solve these problems by continuing our practices, by continuing our economic paradigm, by continuing relying on the same industrial behavior that has created these problems. Of course, over history, we have witnessed and seen and lived through many what we call industrial revolutions. We started by the mechanization when the coal was introduced, and mobility and some industrials. Then the invention of electricity and reliance of industry on electricity that increased production. Then the IT and technology and systems and automation. But then we are now living what they call the fourth industrial revolution, which depends on the cyber systems, the Internet of Things, for example, where everything is connected to the global network. But what we actually need, instead of an industrial revolution, we need a transformational behavioral revolution, because all of our practices are human practices that depend on our attitudes and on our behaviors. So we need an ethical revolution, in addition to the need to accelerate our implementation of the sustainable development. We need to scale up innovations. You know, we all know that there are technological solutions. For example, the reliance on solar systems to produce energy. So why it is not the norm? Why it is still something that is left for people and countries to adopt as they wish? Why doesn't it come as a normal practice, a transformational change towards sustainable lifestyle, sustainable industry, sustainable behavior? And we need an accountability framework where the people hold accountable those who pollute, those who contribute to the state of affairs that we are in today. So this all comes with an ethically based approach and a new paradigm of living in harmony with nature. As I mentioned, there are scientific and technological solutions to the problems that we are facing. However, technology will not solve our issues, because as we have seen throughout history, whenever there is a new technology, there are new challenges, whether there are social challenges, economic challenges, or environmental challenges. So we need those technologies, those governance policies to be based on ethical production and consumption patterns, on promoting behavioral and environmental change. Now, this brings the issue of why do we engage people of faith or religious leaders and religious communities. As I mentioned, the Sustainable Development Goals are not only the responsibility of governments or nations, it is a collective responsibility of all stakeholders. And what do we mean by stakeholders? We mean civil society, scientific organizations, the business sector, the private sector, the education sector. Everybody, every person, individuals have a responsibility towards achieving the SDGs. Now, when we looked at the spectrum of stakeholders, we found that one sector of the community, which is the faith actors, we are not tapping into their powers. And I focus on two important powers: the power of reach and the economic power of faith-based organizations. So the power of reach, we know, the scientists and science tells us that more than 84% of the people associate themselves to a religion or to a belief or a spiritual practice. So we have, all of us, almost all of us, have a point of reference, a standard guidelines that governs our behavior and our attitudes towards one another and towards earth and towards natural resources and towards living on this earth. And we all know that faith leaders are trusted, and we believe in their messages because they rely on something that is divine, something that comes from a divine supernatural power that we all believe in, whether we Muslims believe in Allah or Christians believe in God and Jesus, or Buddhists believe in Buddha, whatever the divine force is, we believe in a supernatural divine force, and we have that sacred scripts that we submit to and we believe in. And when we talk to believers or faith leaders, and if well, I usually bring this example. If you have one subject and you speak to a scientist or a politician or a policymaker about that subject, and they tell you, well, according to the science, according to our policies, this is not good for you. You as a human being, you debate that. You might question the decision. Where did it come from? What is the basis for that? You might not like it, and you might, just not respond to it. But if you are discussing the same issue with a religious leader and tells you, well, God, subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah, in Quran told you in Surah so and so that you are obliged to plant a tree, then you would say amen, and you would go and plant a tree. So science can be debated, religion might most probably will not be debated and will be submitted to and followed. And faith leaders and faith organizations have been the first responders to global issues. Wherever you go, whatever, and I'm sure you have witnessed this in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in other parts of Asia, whenever there is a climatic condition, for example, tsunami or floods, the first responders are those from faith-based organizations. And faith leaders depend on their traditional knowledge and cultural diversity and practices, which was built over centuries. So there is a traditional historical pattern of those behaviors. And environment in almost all of the religions known on earth, they have one common understanding of the relationship between humans and nature. And the relationship is a relationship of living in harmony. So there is a common understanding between all religions. So this is the power of reach. There is a faith leader in every corner of the world, whether an imam in a small mosque or a priest or a rabbi or a monk. Everywhere you go, you would find a faith leader. So the power of reach, you can reach masses of people by depending on the network of religious leaders and faith-based organizations. And for your knowledge, there are more than 37 million churches across the world, more than 6 million mosques distributed in our cities, and dozens of millions of temples. So there is a presence in every corner of the world. Now, what is the economic power of faith-based organizations? We know by scientific evidence that faith-based organizations are the fourth largest economic power on earth. They own trillions of dollars in investments or assets. They own more than 8% of habitable land on earth. They own more than 5% of commercial forests on the surface of earth. They have constructed and managed more than 50% of schools and educational systems. They own more than 40% of healthcare systems on the surface of Earth. They have increased their investments. For example, in the US alone, over the past 10 years, the increase in investment was 3,400% in development projects and areas. So the economic power is tremendous. So they have not only a responsibility, but the power of changing our financial systems and economic paradigms. Because of all of this, in 2017, we at the United Nations Environment Program came up with the Faith for Earth initiative. And our mission is to work with religious communities, faith leaders, to be mutually inspired by the religious scripts, religious practices, but also scientific evidence, and to engage the faith community on policy level. We want to bring the faith leaders to the table of decision making to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Our vision, we want to get to a world where all creations live in balance, or what is scientifically known, living in harmony with nature. And to do this, we have come up with 3 overarching goals. The first one is leadership for policy impact. As I mentioned, we need religious leaders, religious actors to be part of the policy making system. And as probably you know, the UN, and specifically the UN Environment Program, has what we call the General Assembly, or the United Nations Environment Assembly, that puts the global policies, global resolutions and decisions on environmental issues, and meets every 2 years to take those decisions as global issues for the international community to work on. So we want, and we have been able to bring in now more than 60 faith-based organizations to be accredited to the United Nations Environment Assembly. So those faith leaders now sit with policymakers, with ministers, heads of states, and debate and discuss the global decisions. The second one, based on the economic power, we want to green those assets and financial investments of faith-based organizations. So probably you have been hearing about the divestment movement of religious institutions and divesting away from oil and coal and gas and what have you. And the third goal is to bridge the understanding between the science and the faith teachings. So we want to bring the scientific evidence to support the ethical and spiritual teachings, and vice versa. We want the sciences to be based on ethical and spiritual beliefs. Now, what are we trying to achieve? We are planning, and hopefully in February 2022, we will be launching what we call the Faith for Earth Coalition, and I will talk about that in a minute. And we want to integrate the religious values into the design of UN Environment Program. So introducing the ethical, moral, spiritual responsibility into the policies and programs of not only our own UN Environment Program, but everything that is related to the environment at the international level. And as I mentioned, we need to adopt inclusive green economy principles that work for religious institutions, but also other financial and economic international bodies. And we need to bring the scientific communities to work with faith communities. To be able to do that, we are launching, and the government of Iceland is actually submitting a historic UN resolution that will be submitted during the United Nations Environment Assembly, which will be held in February 2022, to create a global Faith for Earth coalition. And the coalition will be consisted of 4 councils. The Council of Eminent Faith Leaders. And probably you have been hearing about the leadership of Pope Francis, for example, on environmental issues. The contributions of Sheikh al-Azhar, Imam al-Azhar, and the ulama, the other faith leaders from other religions. We want to bring all of them in one sitting to convey one coherent message on the role of faith and what the religions are asking the international community to do, and their own commitment towards living in harmony with nature. This body of wisdom will need to be supported by a body of the new generation, a youth council, where the enthusiasm, the power of young people for change supports and learns from the wisdom of the eminent leaders, and prepare the youth of today to be the eminent leaders of tomorrow, based on understanding of the current contemporary issues of the world, whether environmental, social, economic, and so on. And that would need to be supported by the network of faith-based organizations, those organizations that work on the ground with the local communities, whether supporting them economically, reducing or eliminating poverty, providing a social network, and so on. We need to introduce the environmental element to their work. And then all of this should be supported by the Faith Science Consortium, where scientific evidence meets spiritual teachings, and providing a knowledge that is available to all these councils based on scientific facts. In the United Nations Environment Program, and designing our midterm strategy, which actually will lead the focus of the international community for the next 5 years, what we call the midterm strategy for UNEP. And this is a global strategy that has been designed to focus on the 3 planetary crises that I mentioned: the pollution, nature or ecosystem, and climate change. And all of that will be supported by the scientific policy, infrastructure, the environmental governance, the digital transformation, and the finance and economic transformation. For the first time ever in the history of UNEP, we have been able to introduce the role of and contributions of religious actors into the design of the midterm strategy as a strategic approach to working on global environmental issues. Not only to the midterm strategy of UNEP, but also we have been contributing to the G20, for example, the group of 20 largest economies of the world. In their meetings on an annual basis, we do submit what we call the interfaith commitment and appeal to the G20. And we are engaging in interfaith dialogue with the leaders of the G20. We have also been preparing and contributing to the different conventions of the parties on climate change, on biodiversity, on ozone depleting substances, and so on. So mobilizing this interfaith community to contribute to global policy setting is one of our policies. So what have faith organizations and religions done so far? In the past 10 years, there has been an increase in the contributions of faith organizations. We have seen climate change declarations by almost all religions. Islam is one of them in 2015, leading up to the Paris Agreement. There has been increase in the knowledge generation that is based on religion and ecology. We have been seeing global campaigns and also regional and local campaigns promoting living in harmony with nature by faith-based organizations. We have seen many commitments. One of them is called Our Sacred Commitment, where we brought, UNEP brought more than 450 global faith leaders and issued what we call our sacred commitment, committing to action on a policy level on environmental issues. We have seen the interfaith appeal that was issued early October, this October, at the Vatican by more than 40 faith leaders representing 10 religions of the world towards COP26, showing what the interfaith community wants from nations and governments, but also committing themselves to action. And of course, we have seen many publications helping local communities and individuals of faith in their dealings with, their not only environmental practices, but also religious practices. For example, the Green Hajj that was issued 10 years ago and recently. Now, we have seen global leadership from some of religious leaders, and Pope Francis has been one of the leading religious figures, and Pope Francis issued what they call the Laudato Si, or praise to God, which is actually a strategic approach based on the teachings of the Bible to address these environmental, economic, and social challenges. So the Laudato Si introduced the meaning of the creation by the Bible, how the human has been, or humans have been part, or the major part of creating these challenges, and what it means from a biblical perspective for the role of Christians, and certainly it became an international agenda for contributing to a more sustainable world. Now, looking at Christianity and looking at other religions, we see that Christians represent around 32% of the global community. But Muslims, with almost 1.9 billion people, represent more than 25% of the global community and has a major role to play. But we are not building on this power of the 1.9 billion Muslims who believe in one set of spiritual guidance, which is the Holy Quran, the Sunnah, and the practices of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And also other religions with around 1 billion people of Hindus and 500 million Buddhists and so on. So each of those have a set of values, as we mentioned. So looking at that and looking at Islam and what it brings to the environment, it is not new that we know that Islam has a major contribution to make in terms of environmental sustainability. So, for example, in Saudi Arabia in 2002, there was a general framework of the Islamic Agenda for Sustainable Development, issued after the Islamic Conference for Environment Ministers. In 2019, I have participated in the 8th conference of the Islamic Ministers of the Environment in Rabat in October 2019. And I have presented, along with other Islamic institutions, ISISCO, for example, the Islamic Foundation on Ecology and Environmental Sciences, a strategy for the activation of the role of cultural and religious factors in protecting the environment. And we have discussed with other Islamic institutions, how can we activate and how can we mobilize the Muslim community. And also there was, at the same meeting, there was a draft Islamic Network for Environmental Action, some guidelines on strengthening the role of youth and civil society in achieving environmental sustainability in Islamic countries. In 2015, and some of you might have been part of this, the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change. And in 2019, in May, there was the Charter of Mecca, where thousands of ulama and muftis met from all around the world to talk about sustainable development within a civil society and peaceful societies. And as I mentioned, the idea of a charter for an Islamic perspective on the environment came about after our meeting in October in 2019. And the idea of Al-Mizan, a covenant for the earth, was born. And since then, we have been working with Islamic institutions on the design and development of that drafter. So this Al-Mizan is based on the teachings of Islam, and mainly on the Surah Ar-Rahman, which says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahmanu 'allama al-Qur'ana, khalaqa al-insana 'allamahu al-bayan, الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام. That means God created the earth and the skies, the sun and the moon in balance. And he established that in justice and put the balance, and we are requested not to infringe that balance and destroy it for all living creatures and not only for humans. So Al-Mizan is at the heart of Islamic teachings. As I mentioned, we based the Islamic covenant, Al-Mizan, on Al-Quran Al-Kareem, on the teachings of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the Islamic practices, Al-Aqidah Al-Islamiyya, the Aqidah, the Fiqh, the jurisprudence of Islam, the Islamic history, and all of that contributed to drafting Al-Mizan, which is now available in a draft form and has been shared with more than 300 Islamic institutions for comments and review. And we base this review system on the Shura principle, which is the consultative principle that is an overall principle in our Islamic teachings. We have constituted a Al-Mizan core team that I am privileged to chair, representing the United Nations Environment Programme, but we have representatives from the Islamic scientific and educational and cultural organization, ISISCO, the College of Islamic Studies of Qatar, the Qatar Quranic Garden, the Islamic Foundation on Ecology and Environment, Oskudar University, and IFES or Eco-Islam. And we brought together Muslims or Islamic scholars from across the globe. So from each of the continent, we have chosen an Islamic leader who's known to be a scholar who has contributed for many years on Islamic studies. We have a team of 12 high-level eminent Islamic scholars. Now, let me introduce Al-Mizan by showing you this video.
Al-Mizan articulates the ethical teachings and values of Islam that might motivate us to commit ourselves to the behavior changes needed. We identify the most essential aspects of Islam with respect to legislations, regulations, conservation practices, policies, and activism, so that we might begin to take the actions needed to restore the balance, which is Al-Mizan that we have violated.
The Islamic value system establishes the notion of oneness or tawheed, or unity of God, and submission of a human to the Creator. And these are the foundations of Islamic belief. The creation of this earth and its natural resources is a sign of God's wisdom and mercy. Islam teaches that God's creatures resemble human communities and deserve protection. Besides, Islam promotes the notion of good or khair, and protecting environment is viewed as good and khair.
All things are created for right, il-haq. We must treat nothing wantonly and take no life except for right. The Lord of all beings holds us to account for our treatment of each and all. From this comes the attitude of taqwa, profound awareness and reverence toward the Lord of all beings, coupled with the utmost care and carefulness in our treatment of his creation.
Human actions have led to massive corruption and devastation on the earth. Fasad fil ard in the language of the Quran. We humans are created, according to the teachings of our faith, to be stewards on the earth, have not only filled it with corruption and bloodshed, but may have already initiated the sixth mass extinction in the history of the planet Earth, and with it, an irreversible climate change.
The Quran describes the natural world and all sentient beings in its embrace as being in balance. The cosmic equilibrium is associated in the Quran with al-qist, that is equity, fairness, and justice. It presents a rich and vivid portrayal of the earth and the wider cosmos, full of meaning, purpose, order, and sacred beauty.
Everything has been created in accordance with Al-Mizan, to your balance. It's time to understand the boundaries showered by God's grace upon us. Praise Him for them and live an eco-friendly and sustainable life with the rest of creation, and never forgetting all moral responsibilities towards the rest of the creation and future generations.
Human beings are to interact with all components of the environment without infringing God's norms or ways in His almighty creation. Sunanullah fi khalqi. We are to take from the environment and to give to it, to uphold its rights or due, haq, so that it may give us our due. Islamic thinkers consider the ultimate aims, maqasid of God's messages with regard to humankind as responsible, accountable being, al-mukallafun.
The Quran describes all things in the creation as signs that disclose knowledge of God and His purposes to people who reflect, who are intelligent, and who remember. Considering these blessings obliges us to be grateful. We are to interact with the creation with consideration and gratitude. Shukr in Arabic.
In the 6th chapter of the Holy Quran, named after the cattle, the Holy Book describes animals with whom we share the earth as communities like ourselves. Their value as communities precedes their value as commodities and should be respected and treated with care. Nonetheless, communities are treated with a still higher degree of taqwa and rahmah, meaning reverence, care, and compassion. The common good is explicitly understood to include the good of all species and all generations.
A fundamental right of people is consultation, or shura, in all matters that affect their welfare. Each individual, man and woman, as Khalifa on the earth, will be judged alone on the day of judgment for what he or she did with his or her life.
The Islamic garden tradition can provide an ethical framework for Muslim communities over the globe to design with nature. The roots of this tradition are in the heritage of filaha in oases, orchards, and agricultural terraces of arid and semi-arid lands where water is scarce. In making nature flourish to the utmost, we humans enjoy and benefit with nature in a relationship of reciprocity. In other words, takaful.
We urge policymakers, planners, and designers in the Islamic countries and throughout the world to endorse the vision that human beings should plan and design in compliance with the natural laws and the patterns by which the Lord of all beings directs the natural creation. In alertness to the divine signs that pervade it, and in harmony with its inherent disposition, fitra, neither domineering over it nor unmindful toward it.
So this is a brief introduction by the scholars who have been contributing to drafting Al-Mizan. So what does it include, the content and the focus of Al-Mizan and its different chapters? So first, we started by understanding the challenges that we are facing, the current state of the planet, not only from an environmental perspective, but we have addressed also the socio-economic challenges that we are facing. Then we have described the signs on the earth relating to the relationship between earth and humans. And then we addressed how we can work our utmost good towards all creations, caring for the earth and all creations. And then we addressed the how can we work in fairness, equity, and justice and apply the Islamic principles of those in a new political economy. And then at the end, what can we do in terms of conserving our earth and natural resources, tending the earth? Now, if we look at how are we relating to, in Islam, to the creation, the first principle that comes to mind is Tawheed, the oneness, the affirmation of God's oneness, the testimony that God created all beings to submit to one God, to one creator, the sustainer, the compassionate, the God of all creation. So everything in this earth or on this earth worships one God. So we are all united in our religious responsibility. Then the principle of Al-Mizan, which is the message of Surah Ar-Rahman, the equilibrium and reciprocity, that the earth and the skies and all universe has been created in balance and in equilibrium. And then the principles of communities or which is the plural of ummah. And not only the human ummah or the human nations, but also the animals, the communities of animals, that there are communities we need to live in harmony with. And then the principle of our responsibility, Khalifa, or Khalifa fil ard, which is stewardship on the earth. God, who has made you stewards on the earth, you are responsible before God for your practices on earth and for applying and following his messages. And the principles of walking gently on earth as servants of God, the all-merciful, are those who walk gently on the earth, as mentioned in the Quran. Now, caring for earth and the creation is by at-taqwa, the attitude of reverence, the care, the carefulness. And the Quran says, on that day will humankind come forth in scattered bands to behold what they have done. Then whoever has done an atom's weight of good shall see it, and whoever has done an atom's weight of evil shall see it. ومن عمل منكم مثقال ذرة خيرا يرى ومن عمل مثقال ذرة شرا يرى. And then the principle of ihsan, the utmost good, the attitude of devotion to God. We in the Quran says, he who created death and life to try you, which of you were the most good. And then the principles of rahmah, compassion. Rahmah not only towards human beings or to one another, but to embrace everything. Rahmah towards the creation of God. And then the principle of gratitude, shukr. And the Quran says, have you seen the water that you drink? Is it you who bring it down from the rain cloud, or we? If we had willed, we could have made it better. Why then do you not give thanks? And all of that is based on the exemplar, our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who has been created as a mercy to all creations. We have not sent thee but as a mercy to all beings. And of course, on the principles, there is spiritual and ethical values of shahada, of salah, of zakah, of hajj, of fasting. All of these practices lead our caring for our fellow humans and other creators or creations. Now, the sharing part of it. Do we share in equitable manner, in fairness, in a justice manner? So what is said in the Quran? It says, do not waste by excess. وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. God does not love those who waste by excess. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. And the development and lifestyle. Of course, we know that Islam tells us what we can eat and what we should not eat, what we can drink and we should not drink, and how we work and how we interact with nature and with one another. And then the principle of being created as ummah wasat. وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. A balanced, a moderate community, so you cannot and should not infringe of the balance that was created by God. And God says, truly, God does not change the condition of a people until they change what's in themselves. وَلَا يُغَيِّرُ اللَّهُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. So it is our responsibility to change. And then the systems, the financial systems, al-riba, which is the exploitation versus fair economy. And of course, the responsibility of us to consult with one another and be accountable in front of the entire ummah, Ashura principle. Now, what is our responsibility then? Then we have thought of the systems that were put either in the Quran or the practices of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Islamic Khulafa and followers. The system of Hima, which is protecting the ecosystems, the principle of Waqf, the principle of Tayyib and Halal, what can you eat and what you cannot eat, Al-Khalq, Al-Hisba, and so on. And the reflections on the environmental issues of, being able to cultivate land, produce agricultural products, how we deal with wildlife and conservation, and so on. And this is a call to action by Islam. Now, in addition to all what I mentioned, there are many other principles that are integrated or an integral part of Islam. The principle of israf, which is overconsumption, which is actually the cause of all of our human unsustainable practices. The principle of hima, of dealing with natural resources. The principle of fitra, being in state of harmony with the natural world. Principle of al-mizan, the principle of miqdar, proportions. In the systems of the universe, God created everything in proportions. The principle of stewardship, of khalifa, al-wasatiyya, the moderation, and az-zakat, giving to humans, but also giving to nature. And there are many, many other or Quranic verses that provide an understanding of the importance of living in harmony and in balance with nature. The responsibility of a community, for example, in the Quran, it says, nor would thy Lord be the one to destroy communities for a sin. Universal system and not disturbing ecological balance. The water governance, God said and informed them that the water is shared between them. It is not, the ownership of any individual. It is the public ownership of, because it is a God's creation to his creation. The principle of Anthropocene, where we have been introducing corruption on earth. Corruption has appeared in the land and the sea on account of what the hands of men have wrongly done. And the preservation of water resources and life on earth. Environmental governance is mentioned specifically in the teachings of Islam, and as part of the responsibility as viceroys, as khulafa, as stewards of earth. The waste generation mentioned in explicitly in the Quran. He likes not those who commit excess. And the financing for social benefits. Where in other religions do we have a principle that talks about our responsibility and demand us to pay for those who are in need or to conserve the creation of God? So the covenant of the earth, what after the covenant, the draft, the document? So we are establishing a movement, Al-Mizan movement. We want to create Al-Mizan Academy, a scientific, scholarship, a study center or university or a college to bring about the principles of Al-Mizan and to teach, scholars, imams, and all those who are leaders of Islam on the principles, environmental principles of Al-Mizan as in the Quran and the Sunnah. We also want to create an international Islamic civil movement. If you look around you, you would find hundreds of Christian organizations, Buddhist organizations, Shinto organizations working on Islam. on the environment. But if you look at Islamic institutions, you can count them on your hands, only a few. So we want to create this massive civil society movement on Islam and the environment to bring awareness and action by the people. We also want to create a commitment a decade to come or decades to come. So a movement, a decade of action on the principles of Al-Mizan. As I mentioned earlier, the Youth Council, Youth in Islam, we want to bring the enthusiasm, even the frustration of Muslim young people to work towards improving the relationship between humans and nature. And we need to appreciate those who have been doing good work on being champions on the achievements of environmental action. And certainly all of that would require financing. So we are creating a trust fund that can attract funding, not only to manage all of this, but also to give back to Islamic organizations who do employ or implement the principles of Al-Mizan in general in living in harmony according to Islamic principles with nature. And we want to create a network that brings the people of the Islamic nation together in sharing the knowledge, the scientific evidence, and the Islamic teachings for the implementation of these principles. Celebrate an international day, a day dedicated to raise awareness and celebrate action around Islamic principles and Al-Mizan. We want to bring ulama, the imams, the leaders of the Islamic world together in annual or biannual conferences to discuss not only what the Islam says and how we can implement, but also our commitments and celebrate these engagements. And we want to create a movement to green our practices, green the Hajj, green mosques, green our institutions, green everything that we claim that is this is an Islamic gift to the world. So we want to work on launching green initiatives across the world. So next steps for this is finalizing the contributions from the 300 plus Islamic institutions to Al-Mizan. We are almost there. We have been receiving genuine and good feedback. And then we will have a meeting with the drafting committee. We will organize a global Islamic scholars conference to discuss the principles of Al-Mizan and the Islamic principles on environment, and then submit Al-Mizan to the United Nations Environment Assembly, but mainly to be adopted by the Islamic ministers, the Council of Islamic Ministers that meets every 2 years and adopts Islamic resolutions on different aspects. Among them is the environment, and launch a global advocacy campaign that each individual of the Islamic nation would need either to have a copy when reading the Holy Quran, to read the description, the interpretation of the Quran on environmental issues, or institutions adopting strategies of Al-Mizan within their own institution. And thank you very much. Shukran jazilan, terima kasih to all of you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iyad. Alhamdulillah, it was very good informative info from Dr. Iyad. Okay, Dr. Iyad. Okay, we have one question from Nurul Huda. Salam, Dr. Iyad. Where can I find more information, or how can I get involved in this planned Al-Mizan initiative or activities?
We have created a website. Let me try and put it in the chat for Al Mizan in the or on the UNEP website. So let me just copy and paste it to you. Okay, here it is. So this tells you what are the activities, the promotions, that the advocacy campaigns, the engagement, and what comes in the preparation of and launching the movement.
Okay, Dr. Iyad, questions from our society, Malaysian Environmental Professional Practitioner, is what actually you can suggest that we as the Malaysian Environmental Practitioner can contribute to this United Nations activity, and then how actually we can be part of this activity instead of, okay, we already done in terms of study on this Al-Mizan. So maybe you can share with us, actually can give the idea how our society can contribute to the UNEP.
Thank you very much. This is a very great request, and I'm very happy that it is coming from your side. Of course, we need to, first of all, educate ourselves on the scientific evidence of the relationship between Islam and the creation. And certainly, I will be happy to share my presentation with you so you understand the elements. Certainly, once we finalize the draft and Mizan, it will be shared with everybody. But as I mentioned, the most important part is first, individual belief in our responsibility towards the creation. So we need to apply Islamic teachings. We need to go as Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if the doomsday, if the final day comes and you have a sapling of tree in your hand, it is your responsibility to plant it. There are many teachings. وَإِذَا لَا تُسْرُفُوا فِي الْمَاءِ وَلَوْ كُنْتَ عَلَى نَهْرٍ جَارٍ. Do not waste water even if you are at a river. So just individually apply the principles of Islam. Second, come together, form a non-governmental organization, Al-Mizan organization of Malaysia, for example, and start teaching people around you. Start going to mosques and ask imams to talk about the environment, our responsibility, how we are relating our daily life to our responsibility. And then talk to politicians, to policymakers, to employ and implement, maybe to even ulama, to come up with fatwas relating to Islam and the environment, to prohibit the consumption practices of people in terms of, whether cutting trees, waste generation, and so on. So there's a lot to be done, but it starts with an individual belief, changing our own behavior, and then going out collectively with these principles and advocate for them.
Okay, we have Dr. Hairil Anwar.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Iyad.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Subhanallah. So it's true. 1,400 years ago, our Prophet Rasulullah Muhammad Rasulullah mentioned something in Quran, but today, one by one, proven by science. So it's a good thing about everything. In fact, not only talking about sustainability. I would like to follow up the question. In fact, question from one Nurul Huda just now, and also Nurul mentioned just now. So where we can actually share our thought, our programs together with Al-Mizan. So I've been thinking since we actually from MEPS that probably Al-Mizan accredited or something that how we MEPS can be part of the Al-Mizan in Malaysia probably, or Southeast Asia region, especially whatever Al-Mizan program, then we can transfer to our MEPS, then we can share together in this region. Probably you can have a thought about that.
Thank you, Khair Anwar. Thank you for this contribution. And certainly, we want to connect with the people who care for this. Inshallah, very soon we will be launching a specific standalone website for Al-Mizan and the movement. And of course, we will put there some important links for networking purposes. So if anybody wants to contribute, if anybody wants to learn more, then we can have that. If you, Sister Nurul Huda, send me the email addresses of all the participants, I will be very happy to add them to our network, the Faith for Earth network. So you keep getting information, not only on Al-Mizan, but all the global work that we do. But certainly, once there is something about Al-Mizan, you can be part of that. So I will be happy to add you to our network.
My second question, Dr. Iyad, ISO standard already declared that sustainability will be part of the next revisions of ISO. Do you think that they will include also the faith-based sustainability in this next revision?
Of ISO?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because we are still fighting for the global integration of the role of religions in environment in general. And as I mentioned, hopefully in February, we will, of course, with the leadership of the government of Iceland, we will introduce that principle into environmental governance. Once it has been adopted, then it becomes a principle for everything else, whether it is ISO, whether it is, the ESG principle, or whatever there is. So the first milestone that we need to cross is issuing a UN resolution introducing the role of religions into environmental governance. Then everything will fall into place and will be integrated.
Inshallah, inshallah. Thank you very much, Dr. Iyad.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, anyone else have any questions? Want to take the opportunity to direct us from Dr. Iyad? So maybe you have something. Okay, so to the diary, maybe you can share. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Iyad, for your very thoughtful, very insightful things about Islam, sustainability, and also the environment. Okay, we're really glad to have you together with us on this knowledge. Okay, and then for the participants, you can click on the link, okay, attached link, to ensure that when you fill up the feedback form, you will get your e-certificate. All right, and then so feel free to have to give the feedback for this event. And then our next event is next month. We will share with you the event and our we are actually MEPS organize a monthly event, monthly webinar. Okay, and then we next one is internal from the Tuan Maizan Azhar. And then on the December, we have special guest from Datuk Sri Zaini Ujang. Okay, so we will share with you on this event. We will be sharing more on the environmental and sustainability and also the climate change. All right, so thank you very much again for Dr. Iyad. So maybe we can open our camera for the last time. Okay, to get some moment. Okay, Shakila.
Thank you, Puan Nurul and Dr. Iyad for the sharing session. Okay. So
okay, thank you.
Need your kind help to open the camera for me to take the picture.
Oh. Okey, 5, 4 dah cuba 1.
Ya Allah.